You had actually anticipated the question I was going to ask, and that was if we're thinking das Ding as not just the unknowable, but the excessive beyondness, that which is always by definition monstrous and irreducible to a kind of intersubjective dialectics. If that is always there, and if we have what sounds like a very psychoanalytic commitment to that idea, does that not, in some respects, sound like a foreclosure of the ethical? I suppose that depends on how you define the ethical, but But of course, what you've just said has gone some way to responding to that claim, which helps. But the next question then is, if one needs to be not just open and responsive, but to embrace this other, inclusive of das Ding that comes with this other, are we not suggesting something like, in Christianity, if this is indicative of Christianity, a recipe for a traumatic event? Because to embrace the other who entails the dimension of das Ding sounds like a frightening prospect.
Well, I think it in most cases is. However, I would say that what you most face only appears to you as being something in the other. In other words, one of the really important aspects of the theory of the Lacanian thing, this unknown dimension in the other, yes, it's very clearly Lacan's position that this is the kind of primordial trigger of anxiety, this unknown dimension in the other. But what he is less explicit about, I think, is that we have always already populated this dimension of the other, which is beyond our grasp, something abyssal. We have almost always already populated that zone with our own fantasies about evil. So in some sense, I would say this is an ideal place to invoke that other very pregnant Lacanian phrase. Here we need again to traverse the fantasy. We need to distance ourselves in a measured way from our own fantasy, knowing that or anticipating that we have already filled in the blank in a prejudicial way toward others, dismissing them in various ways, or outright condemning them to play a role as one or another species of kind of threatening or downright evil intent. So one of the ethical dimensions of this whole perspective is that, yes, it is incumbent upon all of us to be not only open to the other in a new way, but to be critical or even just simply aware of the ways in which we have always already armored ourselves, prepared ourselves defensively against an other to whom and in whom we project something threatening, something negative, something evil.
Which is also in some ways to say that das Ding is a structural place rather than simply being reduced to or stuck onto one person, one facade, although that is the optical illusion that we so constantly fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. In this way, by the way, this is why I think if you really were, Lacan doesn't raise this, but I think it's appropriate. This is a way in which, from the way I'm reading Lacan, and particularly this way of reading Lacan, reading Christianity, you could say here's really the comeback to Carl Schmitt and his friend-enemy distinction as sort of the foundation of politics. You would say, no, anybody who stops at the level of friend-enemy relation has precisely bracketed altogether and or simply failed to consider this defensive posture that the subject has always already adopted toward others as suspicious of their unknown dimensions and defended against it with a whole kind of battery negative judgments and fantasies.
I had a question about dusting in its relationship to jouissance on the one hand, versus dusting in its relationship to desire on the other hand. And to risk a rather perhaps simplistic or kind of overly categorical divide, I wanted to ask, is dusting a problematic of jouissance, or is it a problematic of desire? Now, presumably it's a little bit of both, but maybe I'll just work my way up to why I'm asking that question. Sometimes in the literature, the thing, dusting, is used in a somewhat loose kind of way. So, sometimes, for example, in Slavoj Žižek's work, we have reference to the national thing, a type of enjoyment incarnated. And in some respects, I think I found myself using that as almost a little bit of a contracted, short, condensed definition. Dusting is a kind of massive enjoyment incarnated. Now, that's not an adequate definition, because dusting necessarily also invokes the sublime, the unfathomable, and of course the sacred. But nonetheless, it seems to be a kind of incarnation of a giant type of jouissance, and it is also lethal in this respect. Mm-hmm. It confronts the subject with the void. It's the black hole that both inspires awe and yet threatens to consume us. And we could run off a whole list of examples. The black hole, the monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey, which I love that example because it is both the condition of possibility for ex nihilo emergence of something new, but it is also a featureless void of sorts that confronts people at the advent of a certain technological innovation and leap forward. Sorry, getting a bit carried away, but the examples continue. Lacan uses, I think, if I'm right, in Seminar 7, Moses in front of the burning bush. We've also got others. Lacan doesn't use this, but I mean, hey, Moby Dick, he strikes me as a bit of a dusting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so coming to my question then, we also have in Slavoj's work the reference to big things in science fiction. And of course, I was also reminded, getting a bit carried away with trying to come up with all these examples, we're teaching and thinking about it, of this huge hanging alien vessel that we see in the film Arrival when we've got this threshold moment. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, then, so here's the question. Is dusting not more a problem of jouissance than a problem of desire? And I ask this because in Embracing the Void, you often apply dusting precisely as a dilemma of desire. And again, the question, it's a complex issue, but in certain of these moments, Captain Ahab in his confrontation with Moby Dick, Moses in his confrontation with the burning bush, is desire the most pertinent dimension of this? Or is it something more like an engulfing, terrifying confrontation with jouissance?
Well, I would say, if I had to pick between the two, I would definitely say the latter, the jouissance dimension. But I would also say that, as I read it, Lacan's concept here of dusting is inherently so, it is such a indeterminate void. Of course, indeterminate void is already kind of a reduplication, a kind of a double speaking of the same thing. But this indeterminacy is precisely because it is the fundamental characteristic of dusting. It's this dimension of I absolutely know not what. And that, I think, privileges the dimension of the jouissant in relation to dusting. However, it seems to me that and désir in Lacan's vocabulary is so much more multifarious and multi-purposed. But I think one challenge Lacan kind of gives to us, in a certain sense, leaves us with, is the question how, the great question of the ethics seminar is, how can one not give way? How can one resist? The point is, the ethical position is to not give up on one's desire. But the unasked question there is, which desire are we talking about? And one way to open up the complexity and challenge of that question is to ask how much of our desire does contain the things that most threaten us, and therefore how much of desire is already informed and energized by something that we would otherwise call jouissance, and which has all of these markers and characteristics of something we do not know, don't necessarily trust, in fact, maybe terrified of. So desire is, I think, the real challenge for us, but behind it is the challenge of this much more profound and threatening aspect of Lacan's teaching, which is jouissance. I don't know if that's a terribly good answer to your question. It's kind of messing around with the terms of what you were saying, but
the section of your book where that question really came to mind strongly was in that scenario, which of course is also very forcefully put forward in the seminar on anxiety. The famous situation of finding oneself with a mask on one's face. There's a praying mantis in front of one, and I wondered, does this incarnate das Ding, or is it a way of incarnating the anxiety-provoking presence of an other whose desire is unclear and for whom my identity is also unclear to myself, all of which means that I'm unable to locate myself in terms of the imaginary dynamics, coordinates of who I am and how I am being seen, and in terms of what the other wants. But I suppose what I was wondering is, for me, that is an epitomization of anxiety, which very much pivots on the question of what the other wants. And maybe I'm being a bit naughty, a bit wicked, but the examples I was throwing at you are, the subject confronted with the black hole, where it's not so easy to make das Ding locatable within an other, because it's, whether it's Moby Dick or it's a kind of natural, enormous, sublime, whatever. So I'm being a bit wicked in making that distinction, but I think in a way in your book you do have a way of clarifying this, because if I'm remembering correctly, there are times when you talk about the other thing. And I suppose if we're precise in that sense, there are times when it's the other thing, and much of what we've been talking about, presumably a great deal, in as much as we evoke the notion of the Nebenmensch, and we're thinking about Freud, how he evokes it, those are moments where das Ding is incarnated within another type of subject. And presumably when that happens, there's always going to be the possibility of desire. Desire going two ways, both in my sense of what does the other desire in me, and how might I locate myself relative to that positive desire. Anyway, so sorry, it was just a little technical workout there that I wanted to get a sense of. Any other thoughts that come to mind about that?
Well, the first thing I would want to say, which is not precisely a straight-on answer to what you're raising, but it's a comment that I want to sort of make sure to retain the sense in which the discovery of this otherness, this foreignness, this unknown and threatening abyssal quality of the other, I think it's absolutely essential to Lacan's conception that this is hopefully a kind of prelude, a kind of ushering me down the road of discovering something abyssal in myself. So that das Ding is, you're absolutely right, I often, even in capitals, repeat the hyphenated phrase, the other thing, or something like that. But the stakes of this relation to das Ding are nothing less than the stakes of my own relation to my own desire and my own identity, my own subjectivity. So dealing with this ambivalence is often how I talk about it, but only the ambivalence is only really usable here if you're going to give it much more profundity and weight than one ordinarily thinks of in relation to the concept of ambivalence. Our relationship to this thingly dimension, which is we encountered in the other, but the stakes are really in ourselves, and that completing that circuit in some way, allowing the what we find anxiety producing and tempting as a kind of tempting to deal with it simply as a threat. We need to reposture ourselves toward, precisely because the stakes are coming to know something about ourselves and to be able to relate to that in some way that is that will deliver me more adequately into some position of what we would say, yes, my true subjectivity and my own true desire.